And now to our weekly Thursday series, Frontier. And tonight we are focusing on environmental conservation as the ravaging effects of global warming become a real threat to the existence of mankind. There is a real need for the situation to be remedied before it's too late. The late Nobel laureate Professor Wangari Maathai relentlessly called for the conservation of the environment as this is the only way to safeguard the future. In tonight's Frontier, our reporter Nderi visited the famous Ewaso Nyiro river that is a pale shadow of its former self.
The drums of a global warming and its devastating effects have been beaten sore by environmentalists for a long time now. That the snow covering Mount Kenya has slowly diminished is alarming at the very least. However, it is a sign of just how precarious things have become. Still, we weren't prepared for what we saw on our journey through Isiolo to Samburu and finally Marsabit, rivers in different stages of drying. This is Ngarimara River here in Isiolo County. By the stones you see, an indicator of a river that once was and largely depended by many. At Sirimon, we noticed that the water levels are really low and crossing from one end to the other is akin to child's play. Yet, this is not the dry season, so the low levels are puzzling. At the border of Isiolo and Samburu stands the famous Ewaso Nyiro river. But it does not boast of the volume of water it once did. The little children waddle about oblivious of the changes. And although it swells up during rainy seasons, the Morans we spoke to say it just does not rain as much as it used to. That alone to them is a sign of trouble ahead.
Wakati tulikuwa na mvua mingi, wakati huo ndio tunaona maji ikiwa mingi kwa raga. Na shota changa paka akutie maji. Maji naenda nakuta mtu mmoja ingie ndani mpaka kwa mtu tatu hivi, ine hivi.
Only when it rains does the seasonal river Lerata in Samburu fill up, and since it hasn't in a while, these goats seen here in search of water wander, perhaps baffled by the lack of water in their favorite watering hole. From the partially dry river Ngarimara in Isiolo County to this completely dry river Lerata here in Samburu County, and as environmentalists would argue, this is a tragedy in waiting that is likely to have a trickle-down effect on those who depend on it.
Sisi ya mwezi wa 4 tunapata mvua ya mwezi mmoja, lakini kwa sasa siku hizi hakuna, ni kitu ambaye inanyesha kwa wiki moja tu inaisha, inasaulika.
The goats belong to 36-year-old Gregory Lesekwet. He's lived here all his life. He too does not understand why it does not rain as much as it used to, and he often has to make a 20-kilometer trip to and fro in search of the precious commodity for his herd of goats, a symbol of wealth amongst pastoralists.
The pastoralists, nomadic pastoralists, are mainly affected, and I think Laikipia has got Laikipia is which is neighboring Isiolo and neighboring Samburu. I think is the main area where the main source of conflict will be really realized, because you see the southward movement to Laikipia, there's an upward movement to Laikipia, and there's always an increasing demand.
And while people in cities assume that the exposed riverbeds in places far away from them doesn't affect them, they couldn't be more wrong.
We're trying to encourage communities to shift lifestyles, the traditional livelihoods, to things like beekeeping.
We are planning to do a camel caravan for advocacy purposes. We've seen that the voice of the people is not really heard.
The biting water shortage in large cities such as Nairobi can be attributed to the devastating effects of global warming such as this. Cutting of trees for charcoal and other uses has had far-reaching consequences.
the grass cover. There's no trees are being cut. You've seen loads and loads of charcoal being transported to Nairobi. That one creates an open space. It increases the runoff during the rainy season, and that's what actually increases the intensity of floods.
It is a ripple effect as what happens upstream trickles downstream. Changes, for example, in Mount Kenya will affect all the rivers that are dependent on it.
Hiyo maji inasaidia sana na wanafaa wahifadhi mazingira, ndo maana ijikuze ndio iwasaidie kwa leo na kwa muda ijayo.
You sit somewhere in Nairobi enjoying your nyama choma, but you don't know that the charcoal that you are using for nyama choma is actually from the areas, the drylands, the rangelands.
While environmentalists continue to put their heads together in search of a permanent solution, the situation at hand is a wake-up call for all and sundry, because dry riverbeds today mean dry throats tomorrow. Carol Nderi for KTN in Samburu County.